There are moments in life when the heart swells with feeling, when every word spoken by another pierces like an arrow, and every silence feels like abandonment. In these moments, we are told, "Don't be so emotional," and we bristle at the words, don't we? But what if that phrase isn't a dismissal, but a key to something deeper than the drama of the moment, a whisper from the cell, asking us to descend beneath the surface? There is a sacred rhythm to the psyche, an ancient song that does not speak in words, but in symbols, sensations, and moods. And among these, emotion is one of its oldest instruments. It stirs within us like a whisper from some unseen depth, an echo from the vast and unknowable terrain of the unconscious. Emotion is not a problem. Emotion is a message. But the tragedy of our age is that we have either worshipped it blindly or rejected it entirely. We have become either emotional slaves, ruled by every rise and fall of feeling, or emotional exiles, cut off from the inner river that gives life its meaning. But there is a third way, a deeper path. To walk that path, one must come to see emotion not as the truth itself, but as a carrier of truth. Just as a dream is not reality, but a reflection of it, coded in the language of metaphor, so emotion must be deciphered, understood, translated. Imagine standing before a roaring fire. It gives warmth, light, energy. But if you fall into it, you will burn. So it is with anger, with grief, with passion. Each emotion has its rightful place in the psychic economy. Anger may be a signal that something sacred has been violated. Grief, a sign that you have dared to love deeply. Fear, a guardian standing between you and an unknown initiation. But what happens when we do not listen, when we suppress, or worse, when we become possessed? To be possessed by emotion is to surrender the reins of consciousness. It is to fall into identification. I am angry. I am afraid, without space, without separation. And in that collapse of inner distance, the self is lost. The ego becomes submerged beneath the waves of affect. Yet to repress emotion is no wiser. What is unacknowledged does not vanish. It retreats into the shadow, into the underworld of the psyche, where it festers, where it plots, where it waits, and it returns, always, in disguise. In projections, in compulsions, in illness, in dreams. So what then is the way forward? We must learn the art of psychic listening, to welcome emotion as a guest, not a tyrant, to say, "You are here, I see you. Now tell me what you came to say." This is not easy work. It demands patience, stillness, the courage to face what lies beneath the surface feeling, because often anger masks pain, joy hides fear, anxiety covers the deep terror of not knowing who we truly are. And so the task is not to obey your emotion, but to inquire into it, to ask, what part of me is speaking right now? Is this feeling old, or is it of this moment? Whose voice does it carry, mine, or someone else's? What truth is buried here that I have not yet dared to face? Because until we begin to interpret emotion, we are not yet free. We are merely reacting, performing, coping. We are actors on a stage written by the unconscious, unaware of the script we are playing out. But to feel consciously, to become the observer of your inner waves, that is the beginning of emotional maturity. That is where freedom begins, and that is where the journey inward, into the soul's true nature. Sentimentality is often mistaken for depth. It parades as compassion, it wears the face of tenderness, it trembles with what appears to be vulnerability, but at its core it may be something else entirely. Something less noble and far more evasive. True feeling is quiet, strong, and often hidden. Sentimentality, however, is loud. It demands to be seen. It begs for reaction. And this is the danger. When feeling becomes performance, it ceases to be truth. There is a kind of emotionality that acts not as a window into the soul, but as a curtain. It draws attention away from the deeper, darker workings of the psyche and offers instead a spectacle, tears that come too easily, outrage that flares too fast, compassion that seeks applause. The sentimental person may appear profoundly emotional, but they may in fact be avoiding the very emotions that matter most. This is the shadow of sentimentality, a false light that distracts from the real darkness within. You see, sentimentality is often a defense, a psychic maneuver to stay afloat, to remain on the surface, where things are tragic but not terrifying, touching but not transformative. It allows us to grieve a distant tragedy while avoiding the unlived grief inside our own bodies. It permits us to rage at injustice without confronting the inner tyrant that rules over our own thoughts. It seduces us into feeling something, anything, so long as it keeps us from feeling what actually needs to be felt. In this way, sentimentality becomes a shadow, compulsion, a strategy of the ego to maintain the illusion of emotional openness, while ensuring the fortress of the unconscious remains untouched. This is why the sentimental person often resists silence. Silence invites the real emotions to emerge, raw, unpolished, inconvenient. The sentimental person, whether knowingly or not, fears this silence, because in that silence waits the truth. There is no depth in spectacle. The soul does not grow through emotional displays. It grows through confrontation with the parts of ourselves we would rather ignore, deny, or decorate with a more acceptable emotion. Often, beneath exaggerated sentiment lies a profound unwillingness to engage with authentic pain. Real grief is not photogenic. Real sorrow is not theatrical. Real forgiveness does not come with a social reward. The sentimental expression of emotion is often easier because it is safer. It remains within the bounds of cultural approval. It conforms to the emotional etiquette of our time. It is grief that fits in a caption, love that performs on a timeline, anger that gets clicks, but not inner clarity, but authentic emotion. It is messy. It disrupts. It does not fit into neat boxes. It asks something of us, something real. It asks that we die a little, so that something truer might be born. The sentimental ego fears this death. It clings to shallow feeling because it senses what lies beneath. And what lies beneath sentimentality is often a psychic wound, waiting to be acknowledged, not performed but healed. And so we must ask, what are we really feeling behind this display of emotion? What part of us feels threatened by deeper truth? Is our grief truly ours, or is it a costume inherited from another? Have we learned to cry for others because we are terrified of weeping for ourselves? These are not easy questions. They are not meant to be. Because the shadow is never found in what we most fear. It is found in what we most cling to as virtue. And sentimentality, when unexamined, becomes a virtue that blinds. It becomes a mask that smiles as the soul weeps in silence. It becomes a song played so often, so sweetly, that we forget the silence behind the melody, the silence that has been waiting patiently for us to listen. To become oneself is not a casual journey. It is not a matter of affirmations, nor the collecting of personalities like costumes in a wardrobe. To become oneself truly is to undertake the long, winding path of individuation, a process not of becoming more, but of becoming whole. And wholeness, contrary to what many believe, is not comfort. It is conflict. It is tension. It is the burning crucible where the opposites in you, light and dark, love and rage, compassion and contempt, are held together until they no longer destroy one another. But to carry such opposites without collapse demands a strength deeper than physical resilience or intellectual control. It requires something far more elusive, far more sacred: emotional discipline. We often confuse emotional discipline with repression, but they are not the same. Repression is unconscious avoidance. Discipline is conscious containment. Repression hides from emotion. Discipline faces it, looks it in the eye, and says, "I see you, but I will not let you steer this ship today." Because to walk the path of individuation is to walk between two great forces, instinct and consciousness, and emotion stands at the border, charged with energy, pulling us in both directions, toward chaos or toward clarity. Without discipline, emotion becomes tyrannical. It seduces the ego into identifying with every passing mood, every surge of fear, every spark of outrage. The ego begins to believe, "I am what I feel." And in that belief, it forgets its true nature, the vessel, not the storm. But what is emotional discipline, really? It is the ability to feel without collapsing, to rage without destruction, to grieve without becoming the grief, to hold your joy without needing to show it to the world for validation. It is the silent act of choosing to not react when every part of you aches to respond, to not scream just because you have been wounded, to not project your pain onto others simply because your psyche cannot yet hold it. It is inner maturity, the capacity to stay with an emotion long enough to let it speak, but not so long that it becomes your identity. Individuation is the forging of the self from the raw materials of the unconscious. But raw material is just that, raw. Emotion is the fire that softens the metal, but only discipline shapes it into something whole. Without that shaping, we are left with passion, yes, but not purpose. We are left with intensity, but not integrity. We are left feeling deeply, but not becoming deeply. And this path, this sacred work of becoming, demands that we turn toward every emotion not as an excuse to retreat into reactivity, but as an invitation to evolve. Each moment of emotional overwhelm is not a failure. It is a fork in the road. One path leads to indulgence, the other to integration. One path loops back into repetition, the other breaks the cycle. But to choose integration over indulgence is not easy. It is not immediate. It is not celebrated. It often means sitting in silence with a grief that will not move, holding back words that would feel so good to say but would leave a scar, letting go of the comfort that comes from being right in order to finally be real. It means sacrificing the temporary relief of release for the long transformation of refinement. Because only through discipline, only through the conscious holding of your emotional fire, can you forge the gold hidden in the shadow. And yet, discipline is not suppression. It is not stoicism for the sake of pride. It is not a cold wall of detachment. It is a hearthstone, warm and grounded. It holds the fire, but does not let the flames consume the house. And perhaps that is what the self truly is, not a perfected state, not an enlightened escape from emotion, but a container vast enough to hold all of it. The joy, the terror, the longing, the fury, the deep and aching tenderness that so many of us hide. And so the work continues, not by denying what we feel, but by growing large enough inside to hold it, shape it, and slowly, patiently, there is a mask we all wear, each of us without exception. It is not false, necessarily. It is functional. It is the necessary attire for navigating the world of others, the social self, the agreeable self, the self that knows how to speak, how to smile, how to belong. This mask is called the persona. The persona is not evil. It is not to be destroyed. In fact, it is essential. Without it, the individual would be exposed, vulnerable, chaotic, unable to integrate into society, unable to communicate, unable to survive. But here lies the danger. What begins as a tool can become a tyrant. What begins as a mask can harden into a face. When we become identified with the persona, when we believe that we are this curated self, this pleasing self, this socially approved self, we lose contact with what is deeper, more real, more raw within us. We begin to believe the performance, and slowly, unconsciously, we silence the voice behind the mask. The persona thrives on recognition. It seeks applause. It adapts to the mood of the room. It mimics virtue. It mimics empathy. It becomes what is most desirable in any given situation. But it cannot love. It cannot suffer. It cannot transform. It is a ghost of the true self, shimmering, hollow, endlessly shifting, and yet we defend it viciously. Why? Because the persona protects us from the abyss. From rejection, from judgment, from the terror of being misunderstood or worse, fully understood. The more fragile the ego, the more rigid the mask. The more unknown the inner self, the more we cling to the image of ourselves we've learned to perform. In the age of visibility, this tyranny is louder than ever. We are not only encouraged, but required, to maintain a constant performance of who we are, online, in public, in our relationships. Even in our solitude, we begin to perform for an invisible audience. The mask becomes permanent. We smile not because we are joyful, but because we've practiced the smile. We speak not because we have something to say, but because we have learned the phrases that keep us safe. We express outrage, grief, love, but we express them in ways that can be seen, liked, shared. And the danger is this: when the persona becomes everything, the soul becomes nothing, because the soul is not efficient. The soul is not clean or perfect or politically correct. The soul stutters, the soul offends, the soul longs for things the persona is ashamed to admit. But when the persona rules the psyche, the soul is exiled. And in its place, we build a life that is impressive, but not alive. We gain admiration, but lose authenticity. We gain followers, but not intimacy. We gain validation, but not peace. And the longer we live inside the persona, the more terrifying it becomes to take it off. To stand without it is to risk being seen, not as an ideal, not as a concept, but as a human being, messy, incomplete, real, and yet something within us aches to be known beneath the mask. There comes a moment, subtle at first, when the persona no longer fits. It feels tight, brittle. We laugh, but the laughter is hollow. We succeed, but the joy is missing. We say all the right things, and yet a strange emptiness lingers behind every word. It is the call of the self growing louder. Not the idealized self, not the curated self, but the true self, the one we abandoned long ago for the sake of survival, applause, or approval. And the question begins to rise, not shouted but whispered: who am I beneath all of this? Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when there is nothing left to prove, nothing to protect? But the persona will not release its hold so easily. It will rage, it will panic. It will try to seduce you back into performance. It will say, don't risk this, don't speak that truth, don't reveal that scar. They will not love you, they will not understand. And maybe it's right, maybe some won't, but that is the cost of authenticity. The price of becoming whole, because to remove the mask is to risk exposure, but to keep it on is to guarantee imprisonment. And so we stand, as all seekers do, at the threshold of truth, holding in one hand the familiar mask, and in the other the unbearable weight of the unknown. Feelings, we speak of them as if they are the truth. We say, I feel it, therefore it is. But the psyche is far more complex than that. Feelings arise in us like weather, shifting, unpredictable, full of force. They are born not only from the present moment, but from the entire architecture of our past. Memories stored in the bones, wounds inherited from generations, images buried so deep in the unconscious we cannot name them. And yet, we believe them. We believe them not as signals, but as verdicts. We do not question, why do I feel this? We say instead, because I feel this, I must act. But this is the beginning of inner confusion, because to have a feeling is not the same as to engage the conscious feeling function. This distinction is subtle, but it is everything. The unconscious is constantly producing emotion, some of it personal, some archetypal, some not even ours. The unconscious throws up rage when our boundaries have long been violated, but we've never said no. It offers sorrow when a part of us is dying, but we keep pretending it's alive. It sends love, longing, jealousy, fear, not as guidance, but as pressure. These are raw feelings. They are real, but they are not yet conscious. To feel something is to be stirred, perhaps even overwhelmed. But to use the feeling function consciously is to step back, to sense, to judge, not with the cold blade of logic, but with the warm light of discernment. It is to ask, what is this emotion trying to reveal? Is this a feeling from the moment, or from a much earlier time? Is it mine, or have I absorbed it from someone else? Does it seek expression or transformation? Without this inner questioning, we become captives of feeling, impulsive, reactive, and prone to distortion. We rage when we should be silent. We stay silent when we should speak. We collapse when we are being called to rise. The feeling function, when unconscious, pulls us into emotional weather without a compass. But when made conscious, it becomes a tool of soul navigation. It tells us not only what we feel, but why, where from, and what must be done with it. Conscious feeling is not emotionality. It is not sensitivity without boundaries. It is not the expression of every impulse that rises through the chest. It is deeper, older, wiser. It is the part of us that knows how to evaluate the value of things, not just how they affect us personally, but what they mean within the greater totality of the psyche. A person with a developed feeling function can sit with their pain without projecting it. They can receive another's sorrow without drowning in it. They can love without needing to possess. They can experience anger without letting it destroy connection. Why? Because the feeling function, when cultivated, becomes a judge, a sacred judge, not of facts or strategies, but of worth, of resonance, of soul. It is not a servant to emotion. It is not a wall against it either. It is the bridge between the heart and the self, but such a bridge is not built overnight. It must be forged in solitude, tested in conflict, tempered in suffering. And often, it is buried beneath years of neglected feeling, emotions we've numbed, bypassed, or drowned in because we lacked the tools to meet them properly. Some people have never developed this function. They confuse their moods for moral truths. They call their emotional chaos authenticity. They romanticize instability, calling it depth. But depth without structure is just drowning. Emotion without orientation is just noise. To truly feel is not to express everything. It is to know what you are feeling, why it matters, and how to carry it with dignity. The unconscious throws emotion into the psyche like dreams in the night, symbols without instruction. But the conscious feeling function translates, it listens, it holds, it names, and in the naming there is power. In the holding there is healing. In the slow turning of raw feeling into conscious understanding there is